I'm Ben Smith. I work as a lead threat hunter for a small foreign exchange and cryptocurrency company in London, in the UK. Thanks again for joining my talk using ELROND in DFIR, acquired artifacts, TTPs, or for 11s. A little bit about me. Prior to my current role, I've been working in various defensive cyber operations roles through the SOC, digital forensics, IR, and threat hunting. A couple of my contributions to the community are there, most proud of which is the attack technique contribution. So without further ado, I'll jump straight into what the talk's all about. So I'm really excited to showcase to you today a couple of tools I've developed over the last few years, mostly sparked by the frustration of parsing numerous disk and memory forensic artifacts. And I would say the main audience for the talk would be anyone who deals with forensic artifacts in their role, in their day job. And when I dealt with forensic artifacts in the past, I found myself repeating the same commands and the same set of activities for almost all of the cases. After all, there are a finite set of locations on a system where evidence can be uncovered. And it was therefore common to collect the same artifacts and run the same tools against those artifacts and produce the same output type of result. So the same file type, as it were, so like CSV, JSON, etc. And historically, I used to collect, or as a team, we used to collect whole disk images. And then we moved to collecting just specific artifacts in the interest of speed. But regardless of how those artifacts were obtained, I generally analyze them using the same tools, leveraging those inside the SandSift workstation. And despite them providing a consistent output, all of the tools, when collated together, outputted in different formats. So some were CSV, some were XML, and some were just unstructured text, and it was a mess. So then trying to analyze those artifacts and draw correlations and relationships between the evidence inside those artifacts was a real challenge. And that's what's led me on to developing a couple of tools, one of which I will be demoing today and introducing the other. So Gandalf is responsible for the acquisition of forensic artifacts from Windows, Mac, and Linux hosts. And then ELROND is what I'll be showcasing today, and that's responsible more for the analysis side. So as part of that analysis, you feed it a disk image or a set of previously collected artifacts, and it will mount the disks if needed, identify where those artifacts are, parse them, and ingest them into a seam of choice, although the choice at the moment is Splunk or Elastic. And then it will do some kind of analysis to identify common anti-forensic techniques if that flag is invoked on the command line, leveraging those tools inside SandSift workstation. So as I've said, it will mount a variety of disk images. So we've got EO1s, VMDKs, DDs for images from the three most common OS bases and memory as well. So if you've got memory dump, it will analyze that too. It will collect and process the artifacts from a disk if you've not already collected the artifacts using a tool such as Gandalf or something else. And it will run it through an existing tool inside SIFT, but it provides that value add of ensuring that output will be in CSV or in JSON. It's a lot more versatile in terms of how you then want to analyze it going forward. Talking about analysis, we can stand up a Splunk instance, an isolated Splunk instance on the fly, as well as an Elastic/Kibana instance as well. And when it does its analysis piece, when ELROND does its analysis piece, it can map evidence it uncovers inside those artifacts against techniques documented in the attack framework, and then stand up an attack navigator instance and produce the heat map associated with that as well. And then kind of additional bells and whistles include hashing, file recovery, keyword searching, etc. And of course, as it goes through each of those stages, so mounting, collecting, etc., it records each of those actions with a timestamp inside an audit file, which is also ingested, if chosen, into a seam. So just before we demo just to touch upon the digital forensic elements if you're not familiar with it. So we typically acquire the artifacts, we parse them, we then possibly ingest them, and then we conduct our analysis. And the challenges I found at each of those stages were that we had a different artifact and a different tool to analyze said artifact. You might have more than one image, so analyzing one disk image can be manageable. But if you start scaling that up to 4, 5, 10, 20 disk images, it becomes a bit unwieldy to have to go through each one of them manually. And you might also want the ability to compare the results of this case with historical cases. And again, with the analysis, you might have a different output produced or a different format of an output produced by the different tools for the artifact. So I wanted to leverage the existing tools because they do a great job. There's no point reinventing the wheel, but I wanted to provide that element of consistent output. And the same with the ingestion piece. I wanted it to be repeatable and consistent in terms of the field mapping. If you ingest an artifact from a case from last year, it's going to have the same field mapping in Splunk and Elastic than it will do if you ingest it today. And the ability to have that inside the SIEM tool facilitates fast and easy to pivoting between those artifacts and cases. So I'm often asked, why have I called this tool ELROND? And if you don't know, he's famed with plating members of the Fellowship of the Ring, band of strangers with a common objective, similar to what the Python application does. So it leverages existing tool sets, but tries to do it faster and easier. So we're invoking a sudo because we want to mount disk images, and inside Linux, if we want to mount disk images, we need to be root. So Python application, that's the Python file, ELROND. We're going to give it a case name. So in this case, it's going to be op ministerius, and we're going to give it today's date. First parameter is the case name. Second parameter is the source directory, so where you want to read the disk images or the collected artifacts from. The third parameter is optional, but it's the output directory. So if you want to give it a specific location of where you want the artifacts to go and where you want Splunk or Elastic to read those artifacts, parsed artifacts from, this would be where you would enter that parameter. But if you don't provide that, it'll just be it will output to the current working directory. Then we've got a series of flags. So we're going to collect, we're going to process, we're going to stand up a Splunk instance, an Elastic instance, an Attack Navigator instance, and then we're going to just invoking some acceleration flags as well. So the demo will be two parts. I'm just going to quickly run through how to run ELROND initially, and then I'll flip over to the Splunk instance, and we will review the outputs of what ELROND produces. So as you can see, it's going to go through and collect all those artifacts. In the interest of time, we'll flick over to our Splunk instance, and we'll come back in a moment, and it will find the Splunk instance, we will authenticate, and we will ingest those artifacts that it's just found. But let's say we are dealing with a case that we've just ingested, and let's go under the scenario that we're looking for evidence of living off the land techniques. It's not uncommon for adversaries to use legitimate Windows binaries to masquerade their activities. So we've got a previously ingested memory dump. We've used volatility to parse those artifacts it's found in memory, and the plugin that we're using this specific instance is the command line plugin, and we're looking for evidence of SVC host because that's commonly abused. So here quickly we can see that because we've managed to ingest it into a SIEM, we're able to quickly consolidate the data and look for things much easier than if we were using it at the command line. And we can quickly consolidate the commands that we've found. And if we scroll down, we can see that almost all of them have got -k flag, and they're all running from system 32. But we can see that this one is running from subdirectory inside system 32 without the -k. So that might be a file of interest. If we pivot from there and see where else can we find instances of DLL host / SVC host, and we've got that here. We just saw the host name there, so we filtered on the host name just for that string. We counted by source, and we can now see all of the other artifacts that we've got from our host, whether that is a memory dump or if that's a disk drive. So we can easily now correlate and pivot between both the disk and the memory. From here, one of my favorite artifacts is the MFT. We might want to look at what evidence is inside the MFT, which is pretty valuable in terms of timestamps. So I've, again, filtered it on the MFT for that host, just for that string, and then filtered the results using a table command inside Splunk. So we've just got the timestamps, and we've got the file name of interest. We've got creation date, and we've got two creation dates, which I'll go through in a minute. I've got alternate date streams and extended attributes. Now, a common anti-forensic technique is time stomping, and that's where the standard information creation date inside the MFT is before the file name information creation date inside the MFT. And as you can see, there's 9 years difference there at a very specific timestamp. So that might be indicative of time stomping. But because we're able to leverage ELROND to parse these artifacts quite quickly and consistently, and then search for evidence inside that, it enables the identification of this to be much quicker than it may be otherwise. So we also saw some other disk artifacts, one of which was the system EVTX event log. Again, I filtered the results, and we've got a reference to a service name and a SID, which are things we might want to take note of. And we've now looked at a couple of disk-based artifacts. We might want to then pivot back to memory, see what else we can find. So another memory artifact would be a shim cache mem. And as part of ELROND, it will run both volatility 2 and volatility 3, and it will just churn out the results from every single plugin. So it will read the memory image, and if it has results from that plugin, it will produce results, produce a file, JSON file. If it doesn't, then it doesn't produce an output. So we might want to see here if we've got any evidence of any other executables, because that's what the shim cache records, is recently executed files. We can see here that all of them have got a count of 1, apart from the one at the very top, which is 965. Also got a very odd name in a very odd location, so that's quite a bit of a red flag, shall we say. We could then pivot off that and look for other instances of a.exe and try and find which SIDs, security identifiers, and ultimately groups or people could be responsible for running that odd executable. So here we've got they're all fairly descriptive security group names until we get down to one called Vibranium. So we've now got a SID, we've got a security group, and we've got a suspect executable, and we've also got PID. So we could then now pivot off those 4 elements, perhaps, or three new ones at least. So can we find anywhere else that's got evidence of Vibranium and a.exe? Well, we've got get SIDs, we've already gone through that one. But now we've got file scan, which gives us the full path that we otherwise found earlier. And we've now also got a reference to a.exe inside of Vibranium users directory inside the MFT. So that kind of circles us back round to the artifact we saw earlier. Another benefit of using ELROND, I mentioned that it does an element of analysis when it parses those artifacts, and it maps evidence of activity against MITRE attack techniques. So we may want to simply just look for anything to do with Vibranium. On that host, we've removed all references to executables or SVC host. And we're just looking for evidence of group policy modification, because we saw earlier that Vibranium was a little bit of a suspect group with its SID. So we could just look literally for a MITRE technique and pull back the results, if there are any. And here we can see we've got quite a few weird results. if you recall, if you had Eagle Eyes earlier and you recalled the SID, it ended in 1114. That's now affiliated with perhaps PSExec activity with the username Vibranium 2, but the SID is affiliated with a different username. So it's starting to get a little bit complex. Instead of searching it in the search bar, we can also use a series of dashboards that are included inside the ELROND app, which is on Splunk base. And we can filter through specific tactics and then go into specific techniques. And if there are results for that technique on the dashboard, you'll see results, as you can see here. If there are no results, then the dashboard doesn't populate. Just lastly, we'll go back to, so this is a previous cases that have been ingested and mapped to Attack Navigator. So we'll see with our case that we're running in this demo, it's found a Splunk instance. We just need to authenticate, and it will then ingest those artifacts into Splunk, and then Elastic, and then do the mapping. But that'll probably take about 5 minutes. So just to summarize, I know that was a bit of, also we went down a rabbit hole, but we started off with an SVC host executable. We found it in a suspect location on a specific host. We then found 3 additional artifacts of interest. That led us to possible evidence of time stomping and a Windows service that we took note of inside the system, maybe EVT event log. That also led us to the evidence of an a.exe file, which seemed suspect. Pivoted off that to go to a new artifact get SIDS, found an unusual group name. We could then pivot off a specific technique that ELROND allows you to do. And then we found evidence of usage of PSExec, which might be indicative of another technique. So we found a handful of techniques within a few minutes. Of course, it's been accelerated for the demo, but you get the idea. So after I'd completed ELROND, I got it to a sufficient state where I was happy to share it. I wanted to focus on the acquisition piece. There are tons of tools out there that do a very good job of acquiring artifacts, but I wanted to facilitate one single tool. The tool's written in Python and in PowerShell, so PowerShell for Windows, Python for Mac and Linux. And that was a core requirement for me because I wanted to be able to use native technology without the need to deploy an agent or install any software in order to facilitate the acquisition. Because when you want to acquire artifacts, you want to do it very quickly. You don't want to have to then deploy something to then acquire something because evidence may have then been overwritten or lost. So you want to be able to leverage what is available. I plan to write a Bash one in the future. My Bash skills aren't up to scratch as well as my PowerShell and Python skills. So the premise would be to acquire artifacts from a Windows, Linux, or Mac host, and it will collect it in the order of volatility. So by default, it won't collect memory, but it will collect volatile information running on the systems, running processes, network connections, and then all the usual kind of disk-based artifacts. But you can invoke a flag and collect memory too. Of course, the output is ELROND ready, so if you feed that directory of artifacts to ELROND, it will read it seamlessly. The USP, I guess, for this tool is that it's cross-platform compatible. So if you're running on a Windows host and you want to collect from Linux or Mac, as long as you've got Python 3 installed on your acquisition machine, you're good to go. And vice versa with Linux and Mac. If you've got PowerShell installed, you can then acquire it from a Windows host as well. And similarly with ELROND, it's all audited. So just to summarize, we've got 2 tools, Gandalf and ELROND, to kind of complete that DFIR process picture. We've got the acquisition side facilitated by Gandalf, and we've got ELROND that does the automated processing and analysis leveraging existing tools. That is me. Thank you very much for attending.